without being too overwhelming. So a little bit about my background. Again, we're going to do these once a month for the rest of the year, covering all the different components of the organic acids test. So if you want to hang around and listen to them, if you miss any, we record them all. You're welcome to listen to the recordings. Even if you hear this initial talk, you're welcome to listen to the recordings just so you can refresh your memories about everything. Who am I? I'm Dr. Dan Kalish. I've been in practice for 24 years, maybe 25 if you want to add them all up. Worked with thousands of patients all over the world. All kinds of different people. It's been the joy of my life to have this practice, outside of my family. This has really been a dream. I guess it would be my spiritual practice, my family, and then my patient practice are the three things in my life that just make me excited to wake up every morning, and I love every minute of the day, almost literally. And I want to try to share that experience with you guys so you can have the same kind of abundance that I've had in your financial lives, in your practice lives, and hopefully that translates also over to the family life, which is of course, probably the most important thing for a lot of us. I've trained a lot of practitioners, doctors all over the world. Before I became involved in natural health, I spent a long time, a couple years actually, doing formal monastic training. I worked with a man named Harada Roshi, a Zen master in Japan. When I was 18 years old, I was in a Zen monastery. And I went back to Asia when I was 22 to southern Thailand. I worked with Harada Roshi in Japan, and then I lived in a monastery, a Theravadan Buddhist monastery in southern Thailand for about a year and a half, almost 2 years, you add it all up. So when I came back to the US, I knew that I wanted to get involved in functional medicine. I knew that I wanted to do something natural health oriented, and I was really excited that I could turn this into a career. And so my goals right now professionally are to educate other practitioners about the work that we do. I feel like, for one thing, functional medicine is just kind of coming into its own, and that there's a lot of historical context that's been lost. And so, I was around 25 years ago getting trained by doctors who had been around for 25 years prior to that. So one of my goals with all these seminars is also to just give you all a historical background and context, application, the same way that as if we were sitting in a living room together, just, hey, talking about organic acids tests and why these are important. And I really clearly remember the conversations from 20, 25 years ago that I had with Dr. Timmons and Dr. Liebowitz and Dr. Frieder and all the men that trained me. And I want to be able to pass that on because their generous giving of their time is what created me and my ability to help patients. So that's what these free classes are about. And if you're really interested in this stuff, you can sign up for the training programs, and I welcome you to do that as well. We'll talk about the training programs in a little bit. But for now, the organic acids test, it's this amazing technology that was created decades ago that, from what I can tell, hardly anyone really understands exactly how to use. So as we go through each one of these webinars through this year, I want to give you a chunk of information that you can apply right away so you can start to run and interpret these tests. It's a very complicated test, and it is not what it seems, as many things in life are not what they seem on the surface. And so I want to delve into that right away and talk about what an organic acids test is at the surface level and what it can be at its deepest level, and how you can apply this to a simple patient or to your most complicated patients, depending on how you want to roll with it. So at its superficial level, it's looking at these metabolic markers. And let me just show you I get ahead of myself here, I'm too excited. But at its simplest level, it's looking at whether your body is getting the right nutrients it needs. And so at its simplest level, it's looked at as a micronutrient test, basically. Like, okay, well, you need CoQ10, you need some arginine. Looks like you need some lipoic acid. End of story. But that's really not what it means. And it's like any great spiritual book that one person would read. You can interpret things at many different levels, right? So we want to go beyond this idea of micronutrient replacement and look at what it's really designed for primarily, which is to assess metabolic dysfunction. Okay, so these organic acids that show up in the urine are going to alert you to potential problems, to different types of physiological damage that's occurring. Okay, and in general, this is not always true, but in general, when you're looking at these, a high organic acids level is bad. It indicates there's too many acids. What does that imply? That the person is also probably acidic as well. So it gives you some information about pH balance. We're going to look at all these different sections, including intestinal health, neurotransmitter activity, detox demands. These are early warning signs that there's a problem with one of these systems that you can probably correct with lifestyle changes, functional medicine workups, including GI and hormone panels, of course, as well as the specific nutrients that this test will tell you about. But I also want to mention, and this is where I think we all get into trouble right away, it looks like a micronutrient deficiency test, but we always want to start looking at macronutrients. Is a person getting enough dietary protein or the right quality of protein? Is a person getting enough fat? Are they getting too much or too little carbohydrate? Okay? And what we're seeing here in a bigger picture kind of way is often macronutrient imbalances on a test that everyone thinks is looking at micronutrients. And I'm going to talk a lot about that throughout the series. So the mistakes that I see the most commonly done with this test is that it's a this for that supplementation. In other words, they have this one marker off that indicates the person needs arginine, and it's the end of the story. And that we're taking the test at face value and not really getting behind the meaning of the markers, which is what I want to start to dive into. Also, that dosage requirements are going to require adjusting for individuals. And it's very rare that you're going to look at the lab, see what the lab company recommends, prescribe that, and get any kind of clinical benefit. In fact, in all the years when I did that, my first 10 or 12 years of practicing using organic acids profiles, I looked at the test, I looked at the recommendations at the back of the test, I gave the patient what was recommended, and then I sat back and wondered why 6 months later they weren't feeling any better and nothing had really changed. Okay, because I was looking at it at this micronutrient level, which is the least interesting and least effective way to look at this. And hopefully throughout tonight, you'll start to get an appreciation for what I'm talking about. Now, within this world of functional medicine, I see symptomatic treatments. We're always looking for underlying causes. And where does this test fit in? Well, this test is often going to tell us a lot of information about physiological imbalances, but maybe not tell you what the underlying cause of that problem is. So that can be a little frustrating. But I want to look at this test again from 4 different perspectives. This is the traditional way. There's an organic acids marker. Ethyl malonate is positive. You get carnitine. Okay. You don't need to listen to a talk for that. You can just look at the lab report. They tell you that already. So we're just kind of skipping over this one. Not super important for what our purpose is now. I also want you to start to think about this contextually in terms of what I call the 4 horsemen, and we'll talk about in detail what they are in a moment. Also in terms of body systems. We're going to break this test down in terms of neuroendocrine, GI, and detox systems. And then a wonderful way to apply this test, forget the physiology, forget the individual markers, forget any complicated clinical model like I've developed with body systems. What about the patient? What if they're just really tired? And you just want to treat based on that presentation. You're like, okay, you're really tired. I ran this test. I'm going to give you everything that this test indicates that's going to help you with your energy level. So you can absolutely use this test to treat simply based on symptoms. Okay? And, when I first learned about functional medicine, I thought that we were treating the underlying cause. And, as a young man in my late 20s, early 30s, was very idealistic, I guess. And I thought, well, maybe I immediately thought, well, that's all that we're doing. Symptomatic treatment was beneath me. Symptomatic treatment was for losers. Symptomatic treatments was for this amorphous medical profession that was over-prescribing drugs. I didn't understand that symptomatic treatment is an absolutely legitimate way to go as long as you know that that's what you're doing and as long as you're investigating and trying to find what the underlying cause of the problem is. So in other words, with this test, we're often treating the physiological damage that occurs because of some other variable. And what are the big variables? Well, you'll all know what they are. Emotional stress is probably the biggest one that throws off our patients and makes them sick. Digestive infections and food reactions don't help either. And toxicity. So we're looking at emotional stressors, spiritual disconnection, digestive problems like infections in the gut or food reactions, foods that are inflammatory, and toxins. So those 3 variables cause what I call the 4 horsemen. Okay, bad, right? 4 horsemen, this is obviously bad. Inflammation, catabolic physiology, that means a person is breaking things down excessively, insulin resistance, and oxidative stress. Now, the beauty of the organic acids test if you interpret it at this deeper level beyond the micronutrient imbalances, is that you can tell, is this person inflamed and how bad is it? Are they trapped in catabolic physiology and how bad is it? Are they insulin resistant and how bad is that? And how much oxidative stress are they carrying? You can learn about each one of these 4 key components in chronic illness from this test. Now again, the test may or may not tell you why they're inflamed, catabolic, insulin resistant, and having oxidative stress. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But it gives you an insight into these 4 issues, which you can then correct. And imagine if every one of our patients was being treated for inflammation, catabolic physiology, insulin resistance, and oxidative stress. Cancer, heart disease, diabetes, I mean, everything would just start to go away if we could get a grip on these 4 big issues. So that's, to me, kind of like the heart and soul of this test. It's an essential test because the other types of lab work that I do don't always give me this window of insight that this test can into these 4 areas. Again, not always the underlying cause. The underlying cause can trigger these kinds of physiological damage. In other words, if a person is gluten sensitive, that can make them inflamed, catabolic, insulin resistant, and cause a lot of oxidative stress. If the person has a Giardia or H. pylori infection, that can make them inflamed, catabolic, insulin resistant, right? So we're not always talking about underlying causes. So this is not the first test that I would do with a patient, but it's an essential test nonetheless. So in terms of treatment models, and this is a complicated lab, and trying to just wrap your mind around these 46 different variables for most practitioners is completely overwhelming, and so it's hard to know where to start. So I've broken it down into the clinical model that I always use in my practice, so we can look at this organic acids in the same standard treatment model that I follow all the time, which is neuroendocrine, GI, and detox. And that gives a semblance of like organization and structure to the test so that you can see more clearly what you're going to want to do. There's 7 sections of the test if we want to look at this from a body system perspective, and we're going to cover each one of these throughout the different lectures. Tonight we're going to start to talk about carbohydrate metabolism, okay, which is related obviously to hormones, foods. We'll later then talk about energy production and neurotransmitter metabolism, all of which show up on this test in different ways, all of which I would tie into the neuroendocrine system. The reason why I put energy production in this category is because obviously most people that have neurotransmitter problems and carb-related issues are also tired, so it's kind of a convenient placement for that. There's a whole different section of the test that we'll look at in a future talk that goes into the GI system, bacterial overgrowth in the intestine, clostridial overgrowth in yeast. We were just talking about this today in the training program this morning, how great stool testing is for finding out problems like crypto, giardia, ehisto, etc. But how oftentimes we can't get an accurate assessment of what's happening in the small intestine with a stool test. And so the organic acids gives us this window into all these other issues that are happening in other parts of the digestive tract. Very helpful. It's not a substitute for a stool test ever, but it's a wonderful complement to a stool test. And I'd say in my practice now, probably 50-60% of the GI treatments that I do are missed by the stool test and captured on the organic acids profile. So it's a wonderful complement to have them both. Okay, and then we want to wrap up with the third body system. This test also shows detox indicators, oxidative stress markers, and gives us a lot of information about methylation. Super important. I mean, when you think about it, if you just took one of these 7 areas, it would be worthwhile to run the test. The fact that this one lab presents all 7 of these categories to us is, to me, like beyond exciting and phenomenal. I'll tell you though, it took me a good 20 years to understand how to use this test. I mean, it's almost too much information. I also always think about design because I know you guys are going to show up in your clinics tomorrow morning and then you're going to have to actually use this stuff with real patients. I practiced yesterday all day. Well, that's not true. Half day, 5-6 hours. I'm going to practice tomorrow. I'm in the exact same boat. So when I look at this organic acids test, it's not like I'm a guy working in a lab or a guy working for a supplement company. I'm a guy that actually has a private practice and is actually running these tests with real people and selling them stuff and making sure that these people get better. And I have an all-cash practice, so there's a sort of requirement that this actually works. So it's not like a theoretical construct that is kind of nice to know. This is like how I actually do it in practice for real. So supplement treatment protocol design to me is like one of the essential things, because if you have all this information, you interpret the test accurately, and you don't do the protocol design properly, people just aren't going to implement. So I really want to focus on this over this series as well, so you guys can be successful. And one of the things that I think you can do is group the organic acid supplements within some model, and I use this 3 body system model: neuroendocrine, GI, and detox. So every patient, every time I run one of these panels, knows that that product I recommended for them is for their neuroendocrine, and that other product I recommended is for their detox system. Believe me, it's enough information for patients to hold 3 body systems in their head. You don't have to make it more complicated than that. But every supplement from an organic acids profile should fit into one of these body systems so that the patient can understand why they're taking it, be motivated to take it. So otherwise, even though we understand these things, people just aren't going to follow through and do it. Now, this slide gives me a headache just looking at it, but I want to put it up so you can see that this is really complicated. And if you want to study this on a micronutrient level and understand the biochemical steps in each one of these pathways that's on the board here, God bless you. I personally am obsessed with biochemistry, and I do actually spend, like last summer, this is a true story, I was in Hawaii. I guess we were on vacation. That's what you do in Hawaii. We were at a hotel. We were on the beach. And I actually listened to about 25 hours of talks and information about the biochemistry behind the organic acids test. Okay. My girlfriend was reading novels. Everyone else was like eating ice cream and stuff. And I was sitting in the chair. I was on the beach with my shades and hat on, but I was actually listening to biochemistry lectures because I find this stuff fascinating. But I just want to let you know that you don't need to understand this biochemically in order to use it clinically. So these slides you can just skip over, and they're there for your reference. Okay. So tonight's talk is a little bit about carbohydrate metabolism. I just thought I'd throw in a little story about myself. So the picture on the left there is me about 6-7 years ago. Picture on the right is me 19 pounds later when I dropped 19 pounds. So that was maybe last summer. Okay. So what I learned from this process is that, and this is one of the things that's the most frustrating in my practice, is patients who have weight loss resistance. They just can't lose weight. And in the picture on the left, I was cycling 5-6 hours a week. I was running 3 or 4 times a week. I was doing yoga twice a week. I was exercising like a madman, and I was overeating really healthy food. When I figured out that the fact that I was over-exercising and overeating was leading to this kind of ridiculous weight gain, and I cut back on my exercise to an appropriate amount, and I cut back on my food to an appropriate amount, lo and behold, a few months later, I dropped 19 pounds. I feel great, and, what can I say about that? But this talk tonight is, got some personal relevance to me too, because I had never tried to lose weight before until last year, and I think a lot of the reason why I was able to do it was because I understood the biochemistry here, and I didn't overthink it, but I followed the basic rules that we're going to talk about tonight. It really worked for me. I think you're going to find this works for you if you need to lose a little weight. It'll work for your patients, etc. Okay, so let's look at the systems. And we're going to break these talks down, and tonight's all about carbohydrate metabolism. There's a reason why that's first, because that's one of the first things that I always want to deal with patients. Are you eating healthily? Are you getting the nutrients that you need? Is lipoic acid a problem? Is chromium a problem? Is your blood sugar stable? And all the implications that come from that are absolutely just an essential foundation to any program. I think it's pretty hard to get someone to heal if they're not maintaining good blood sugar and they're not eating properly. So this is right why we put this first, because this is like an essential starting point for a lot of people. Okay, and we can talk about these other areas later in different talks. All right. So I also want to just show you a couple slides about where this is all happening, because we're about to get into some technical information, which is a little confusing. And somehow it seems in my mind, it helps if I just kind of know physically where in the body is this going on. So we're going to talk a lot about mitochondrial energy production in the next couple of talks. That's going on in the mitochondria. Here's a picture of the mitochondria. Okay, and we're going to get into oxidative stress and all these things later too. But a lot of the energy producing information that we're going to talk about in the first few sessions is concentrated on or focused around what's going on in the mitochondria. If the mitochondria are working well, we can burn fat, we can burn carbs. If the mitochondria aren't working well, that system starts to break down. When things are going poorly, a lot of the work is dumped onto the liver. And you don't want to be necessarily doing all these things in the liver, but that's ends up what ends up happening for people. So we want healthy mitochondria. We want to avoid overusing the liver. And when we look at carbohydrate metabolism, we get a little more into detail. That'll make sense. But that's kind of the location for what we're talking about here. Now, in terms of the bigger subject for tonight, we're going to focus on carbohydrate metabolism. And let's take a look at how this actually works. So carb metabolism, and there's a little bit of a trip down memory lane for a lot of us probably. There's glycolysis, right? And if you look at this, there's just a few things on here that I just want to focus on. There's glucose or sugar, and then at the end of that process, we end up producing pyruvate. That becomes important a little bit later. Okay? And then there's also gluconeogenesis, the production of new or fresh glucose, which can be a good thing, can be a bad thing, depending on how we look at it, and you'll see what I mean in a sec. Okay? Pyruvate and lactate are being high on one of these tests. High levels of pyruvate and lactate is an indicator that the person's in catabolic physiology, that they're in a breakdown state. Okay, so in general, with this test, high pyruvate, high lactate is bad. Pyruvate, as we just saw, is the end product of glycolysis. It's actively transported into the matrix for aerobic respiration, and the lactate, when the mitochondrial metabolism is inhibited, oh, sorry, that slide that is a little bit off. When the mitochondrial metabolism is inhibited, it's converted into lactate. So let me show you here. This picture was wrong. There was a little typo in there. Sorry about that. I didn't catch that earlier. This is accurate here, though. Here we have your pyruvate. If pyruvate goes up, there's a problem. It means that what's not happening is that we're not producing energy properly within the mitochondria. So high pyruvate means the mitochondria is broken. It's not working properly. You can also have high lactic acid or lactate, sometimes it's referred to, high lactate that can cause or be related to the exact same problem. So if pyruvate's elevated, things are not so good. If lactate is elevated, things are not so good. What we want to have happening instead is for that pyruvate to be converting over here into the mitochondria where we can burn it up for fuel. And if that's not happening, you're going to have some pretty serious symptoms in terms of unstable blood sugar, fatigue, and problems like that. One important note is that when this system works properly and pyruvate goes over here into the mitochondria and is turned into energy, we generate large amounts of ATP. 30 plus units of ATP are generated. And that's important because later on we're going to see that when we go down this pathway from pyruvate to lactic acid and lactate, we have the opposite effect. We don't generate 30 plus units of ATP. We actually use up units of ATP. There's a -4 if we're going under this pathway, which is anaerobic respiration. Okay, so what we want to do is make all the energy in the mitochondria. We don't want to have high pyruvate. That indicates that this system is backed up and not working. It's just kind of like a detour on the freeway, right? If there's a block right here and the mitochondria is not working properly, the cars are going to back up. Pyruvate's going to go up. That's bad. If there's a problem with the mitochondria and the person's under stress physiology and they're not producing sugar in the way, or they're not metabolizing sugar in the way they should, lactic acid or lactate is going to build up and they're going to have problems. And you'll see this really clearly on the lab. So the lab tells you whether or not the person's able to handle this. And this is another schematic of the same basic concept, right? That we're taking glucose, breaking it down through glycolysis into pyruvate, and then using it for different purposes. And if that's all going smoothly, then pyruvate and lactate levels are normal. If that's not going smoothly, then we're going to see problems. And when things are going smoothly, everything works well. When things are not going smoothly, the liver ends up taking on a huge burden. So another schematic of the exact same thing, just so you get an idea of what we're talking about. Again, pyruvate converting into lactate. If either of these indicators are high, it shows that what? We're under anaerobic physiology. We're doing this without oxygen. Not a good thing. We want to be over in this category here where we're using acetyl-CoA for making energy rather than going through the pyruvate and lactate excessively. Now, when things get really bad and we're stressed, and think about this: you're sitting on the beach, you're eating a coconut, life is pretty good, and then 17 wild elephants come out and they start stampeding towards you, and you throw your coconut away and you grab your spear, and the 17 elephants, you're not even thinking about fighting, so you just start to run. And in order to get that energy to run, the whole concept of using mitochondrial energy and oxygen for respiration, all that stuff just completely gets tossed out the window. What do we do instead? We go into what we call the Cori cycle. This is the emergency source of energy production. Okay, and here now we're going through gluconeogenesis again, but in order to make the sugar, we're actually converting lactate into glucose. So your body can do this, which is pretty amazing, and it will do this when we're under emergency situations. But the problem is that it's a very metabolically taxing process. It takes a lot of energy to make this happen, and there's a net loss of ATP. You get a gain of a couple of ATP, but you use 6 ATP to make this wheel spin. So in other words, our patients that are stuck in the Cori cycle and are making energy this way have a net loss of ATP, 4 units of ATP, every time they're trying to convert glucose into energy. So what does that mean? They're tired all the time. Okay, because they're not getting this plus 30 some units, they're getting a negative. Now, if you're just running away from 17 wild elephants and then you're relaxing the rest of the day, that's fine. But our patients are in this stress physiology constantly, so they're burning up or using up more ATP than they're getting back, and that's one of the reasons why they're completely exhausted all the time. Okay, that's a pretty big issue. So the Cori cycle, again, shifts the metabolic burden from muscles to the liver. Okay, we're doing this in the liver. Now the liver is getting taxed. We have all this lactate. We have all this inflammation. We have all this acidic physiology happening, right? We're stressed, we're tired, we're acidic, and the liver's taxed, and the body's starting to fall apart. Okay, and that's how most of our chronically ill patients are presenting. Again, gluconeogenesis, this is the quick energy that we produce when we're under stress. You can do it, but it's not something that you want to do all the time. And eventually what starts to happen is we end up with these high lactate, high pyruvate levels, and a major metabolic problem. The person's exhausted, their blood sugar's unstable, they're eating tons of sweets, and it just goes from bad to worse. Okay. I'm going to skip some of these slides because they're not too important. This is just about fat cells, and basically the more fat you are, the more fat you hold, the more potential you have for inflammation, and I want to skip forward a little bit here to the punchline here. So in terms of how you can start to correct this, and I'll show you on the labs in a moment too, more specifically. There's nutrients that are designed specifically to fix these problems. Lipoic acid is one of them, and that's probably my favorite. I find that it works really effectively. Very importantly, it's well tolerated by most patients. Even when people are sensitive and their liver has problems, because it's also very effective. Lipoic acid is in fighting free radical issues. It's also one of the nutrients that we can use to help regenerate the liver. So with your really sensitive patients that you may be a little concerned about giving a whole bunch of supplements to, lipoic acid can have many, many purposes, not only to support insulin and help with this blood sugar carbohydrate metabolism type issue, but also to act as an antioxidant to protect the liver. And again, it's usually pretty well tolerated even in sensitive individuals. So I use lipoic acid almost every patient. I mean, it's really common because I want to use it for a liver toxic patient. I'll use it for a patient who has carbohydrate problems like we're seeing here. I use it for people who have sugar cravings. People just need more antioxidants, something that I use almost all the time. And I found it to be very, very effective. Now, not everyone needs it. I may be exaggerating a little bit, but something that I use quite frequently. All right. So again, some simple protocols, and we're going to look at some lab results in a moment. I'll give you some more detail on here. But we're associating these things not only with the specifics that we're talking about with carb metabolism, but this spreads out into other issues like the insulin regulation. Of course, this is also going to involve the adrenals because cortisol is a glucocorticosteroid, so we have blood sugar component that could be taxing the adrenals. You could definitely throw the thyroid in there. I just didn't have room in this slide. That's as important as the adrenals for all these issues that we're talking about. the generation of sugar and carbohydrate metabolism, mood changes, right? So we've got, when we're treating people for this one problem, carb metabolism, you might see improvements in the adrenals, in their sugar cravings, and in their mood just from this one simple protocol. These are specific supplements that I've used very effectively. There's other companies too, of course. Designs for Health has lipoic acid supreme. There's metabolic synergy. There's diaxanol from orthomolecular. Most every one of these companies is going to have a product for carbohydrate metabolism. Okay. So now let's look at the labs here because I'm going a little slow. Here we go. So here's like one of the key components of all this. What we're talking about here, the citric acid cycle, this is what's happening in the mitochondria. So before we even get to this point where we can make energy in the mitochondria, we've got to be able to take the macronutrients, remember we're kind of focusing on macro today, fats, carbohydrates, and protein, and be able to burn them up for fuel. So what we're focusing on tonight is when things go bad in this particular little zone right here. So if you take carbohydrate and you put it into the form of acetyl-CoA and you run energy through the citric acid cycle, you get all this ATP. Remember, it's plus 36 units, etc. And the person's happy. They have lots of energy. That is not our patient. When this system is broken down and there's a block, and let me draw the block in a blocky kind of color, which I guess in our culture is red. There's a block right here. Not good, right? We're not accessing the citric acid cycle. What happens? There's a buildup of pyruvate and or lactate that indicates that we're not taking carbs and burning them up for fuel. Now you know automatically you got a major problem and that you're not really going to be able to restore energy systems. You're not going to be able to make that person feel better. You're probably not going to be able to fix their hormones unless you deal with this pyruvate and lactate problem. Okay, there's another component that's part of this section of the test, which is over here, and that's beta hydroxybutyrate. Okay, and that's a little bit different. That's related to taking protein and amino acids and turning that into fuel. Okay, so if beta hydroxybutyrate is out of balance, it implicates there's a problem with protein converting into energy. If pyruvate or lactate are out of balance, it implies there's a problem with the carbohydrate portion of all this, right? So that's kind of the basic setup. Now, I'm going to take a moment here, and I'll leave time for questions at the end too. Before we get into the detail on the lab findings, I'm going to do a little promotional thing for the Kalish Institute because I am very proud about what we have created here. So for those of you that haven't taken the training program yet, we have this amazing program. We spent the last year and a half updating everything, so the content is all fresh and new. It's now a one-year program that includes all kinds of content that you can't imagine. This is the community feature. I just want to show you a little bit about the content that we created, because I'm very excited about it. Wonderful team of practitioners and IT people that I work with. We have treatment maps. We have case studies. The treatment map is pretty cool. You could click on a treatment map. Let's say, what are we talking about tonight? Let's say we go into energy. You click on any one of these subjects, and you have all the protocols, all the supplements, all the lectures associated with that. We've really organized this to a level which is kind of insane. And then if you go here, and you type in, let's say you're interested in organic acids, which is the organics profile. We have a database now, and it has a search function with, did that wrong, which has a search function that has, we have about 2,000 case studies in here now, which is pretty exciting too. So when doctors have questions, let me go back here and do this right, and they want to see, before and we, of course, I have a live call every week. We talk about this stuff every week. But if they have a question, they're just wondering what's going on, they can go in and look through case study after case study after case study of subjects that relate directly to like the subject that we're talking about tonight. Overview of the organics profile, literal implication of the test versus bigger picture, case study number 1355. We've got about 2,000 case studies in here that are real patients from real doctors that were submitted that we went over in class. Everything is on video. Everything is transcribed and written down as well. So you get literally exposure to thousands and thousands of cases. Every week that we do the class, I also do live calls with a small group of doctors, and we're on the phone going over your labs from your patient base, making sure that we answer all the questions, that you've got everything figured out, that you know what the protocol should be. There's a lot of problem solving, as you all know, involved in this work, a lot of problem solving, and things don't always go as you would want. We also, in addition to that, have all the lectures that are organized in this mentorship format here. So you click on a lecture, I don't know, let's say you click on GI pathogens, for example, and there's a whole module here. It's basically a month of materials that goes through GI treatments, bacteria and yeast, parasites, etc. You can click on any one of these, and you'll see lectures and videos, huge amount of content. It's a really amazing and robust system. The best thing probably about the new version of the class is that we have a community of a couple hundred doctors that are involved in the training program right now. You can message them. You can see here's it's kind of like a Facebook type format here where there's different doctors that are asking questions and answering questions, and every week we add more and more information to this. So if you're interested in a training program, I think we have one of the best formats available. You can talk to students who have taken this class. A bunch of them are on the phone right now. I can see their names, and I'm really proud of this. And this new version that we have is really, really improved over the past years. It's the best work that we've ever done by far. The technology is perfect, and it's really, we've been able to bring people together and educate them in a really effective way. I teach every class myself personally, and I can't say enough things, good things about it. You know, when we're on our call, like we had our call last night, I don't know, it's supposed to be an hour long. We did like an hour and 15 minutes because no one wants to get off the phone. We're all having fun and we're talking about really important things that are critical for our practices. Everything from EMR systems to how much DHEA a certain patient needs to whether someone can take this product because they're pregnant or not pregnant. Okay, so it's a very robust program. If you want to learn about functional medicine, check it out, sign up. You can sign up for a free call with me if you want, and I'll step you through whether it's an appropriate program for you or not. Okay. So that's the advertisement. Now we get back to the regularly scheduled programming. Carbohydrate metabolism markers. We talked a lot about this already. Should be pretty familiar now. There's your pyruvate, very high. That'll show up on the lab. Now we know what that is for, right? Controls the regulation of glucose, anaerobic energy production. We want to be using oxygen to make energy. We don't want to be in this Cori cycle nightmare where we're having high pyruvate, high hydroxybutyrate, high lactate, etc. That's all bad. So here's pyruvate again as a blow up. High pyruvate, metabolic acidosis is associated with that. There's certain nutrients that are associated with it as well. And then you can see this pathway that was blown up from before. Again, pyruvate going up implies that carbohydrates are not coming down into this area that they should. Same with lactate, same with beta hydroxybutyrate. Any of these markers going up implies that we're not doing well with the macronutrients. Remember, macronutrients. So of course there's a dietary lesson here in that we want to make sure that we control the macronutrients and balance them out properly. Maybe the person's got a problem with beta hydroxybutyrate because they're too low in carbohydrate. Absolutely, that's possible. You can see people who cut carbohydrate back too much. Maybe they're eating too much carbohydrate. Maybe they're not digesting it well. Maybe they have one of these nutrient problems that's implicated here, lipoic acid and the B vitamins, right? So that's one of the markers. The other is lactate. We've talked a lot about this as well. Same basic concept that we mentioned before, but it shows up on the test. And then there's a beta hydroxybutyrate, and that has more to do with amino acids and protein, the ability to burn protein for fuel, right? So now here's what the actual test looks like. And here's a section that we're focusing on tonight: pyruvate, lactate, beta hydroxybutyrate. So let's look at a couple of these and we'll talk through this, all right? Here's another one. By the way, that one was normal. These well, no, one of those markers was low. Oh, sorry, I'm flipping around here. There we go. So here's another test. Now, and these are all patients of mine. My staff just grabbed these from the charts, took all the names off and everything. So here's someone with high pyruvate. So right away, you know a whole series of things. They're probably acidic. Their pH is probably a little bit off. Check their pH. It'll probably verify it. Maybe they need some work in that regard. You need to focus on their diet. You have to get them some blood sugar stabilizing supplements. Maybe you should check their adrenals or thyroid or hormones that are all involved in metabolism. You know, this implies a whole bunch of things. Just giving them lipoic acid and hoping that the problem goes away is what I want us all to avoid, okay? Because that's the micronutrient approach. And that's really, Again, I tried it for 10 or 12 years. It just doesn't work. And if you talk to any doctor who's been around for a while, who's run a bunch of these, they'll absolutely agree with you. It just doesn't work that well. Okay? It's just not an effective strategy. Now here's another patient. This person has elevated beta-hydroxybutyrate. Now the first thing you want to do when you see that marker go up is ask them, hey, are you on a paleo diet? Are you eating a lot of protein and not that much carb? Because that could be a normal reaction to a paleo diet. Now, I do find a lot of people, you guys probably see this in your practices too, that are getting a little too low carbohydrate these days. People think that something's good and they maybe take it to a little bit of an excess. So that is definitely possible and something you want to investigate, whether the person might be a little bit too low in carbohydrate, and you might want to add a little bit of starchy carb back into the diet to help balance things out. I'm not saying that always happens, but it's definitely a possibility. Okay. Here's another, let's see, go to another one here. Let me show you actual protocols, and this is kind of like the exciting part, all right? So number one, I'm going to pull up a sheet here. I can show you how this actually works in practice. We have time? Yeah, we do. We got plenty of time. Oh, that's awesome. Okay, good. So I want to show you like what this actually would be like if you were doing it for real. And here's a basic health plan that I use all the time. And let's say that you had a marker where you had high lactate or high pyruvate which apparently I can't spell very well. There we go. So right away you know a couple of things, that you want to put them on a blood sugar control diet, get all that figured out, okay? You want to also, sorry, I started typing there. You also want to think about blood sugar control. So again, I use lipoic acid because, again, it's a user-friendly supplement, has a lot of purposes. And one of the things I've tried to do in my practice, and this is partially from an economical standpoint in terms of not wanting to hold a lot of inventory. It's also partially space related. You don't want to have a huge amount of shelving space dedicated to all this stuff, is to have products that have multiple uses that you can just swap out. So lipoic acid supreme is wonderful, or some of these other companies I mentioned, you can get it from Ortho, Douglas, Metagenics. I mean, every company has a blood sugar control product with lipoic acid in it. But the really convenient thing about using it is that it also helps the person that has a toxic liver. So you might use lipoic acid in a completely independent way. We'll talk about liver toxicity in a later lecture. But you don't have to stock like a separate liver thing and a separate blood sugar product. So products that have multiple purposes, in my mind, are really helpful. Also, what I'm always concerned about is the number of pills that the person physically has to swallow. Lipoic acid supreme from Designs for Health, 300 milligrams per capsule. Woohoo! What does that mean? That means you just need to give them one pill twice a day and it's game over. Okay, that is convenient because when we're building these programs and focused on program design, there may be 7 other products that you want to give them. And if you have to use a blood sugar support product that requires like 6 or 8 or 10 pills or something, you're just going to have burned up a lot of your potential capital with this one product. So products that have multiple purposes, products that are high dosage at therapeutic level, so you don't have to use too many pills, in my mind, really, really helpful in terms of solving a lot of these problems. Okay, and again, there's many companies that have this typical dose per day of lipoic acid. The total daily dose is usually around 600 milligrams. Now, there's other strategies to this as well, and usually the lipoic acid is going to be stacked on top of some general multi-pack or product that has all the vitamins, minerals, etc. in it all together. Okay, so that's all kind of an integrated program. All right, so let me show you some real-world examples of this here real quick. We got kind of a taste for all this and how it works. And here's some case studies. This is the fun part. So let me grab, and I want to show you again, in a bigger picture context, so it's not just this isolated thing. Let's pick a good one. These are all pretty good, but let's pick one that's going to be appropriate for you all for tonight. There we go. So here's the organic acids profile for this patient. Pyruvate is elevated. It's not just elevated, it's very high. So right away we know carbohydrate metabolism problem. Is that their only problem? Probably not. They also have mitochondrial issues. Woo, really bad. So let's think then, contextually, that's not the only thing that we're going to treat. So let's back it up. Remember, there's 3 body systems, so we're also going to look at the stool and the GI. Oops, dientamoeba fragilis. Could that be related to the blood sugar problem? Absolutely. Inflammation in the gut, classic generator of blood sugar-related problems. And then we back it up another step. We say, well, I wonder what their adrenals look like. And we look at the adrenal lab. Okay, actually that one's pretty good. So this person doesn't have an adrenal problem. They have a parasite, which is a big issue, dientamoeba fragilis. So we know there's inflammation and tissue damage in the gut that we're going to have to treat. And then their fatigue and symptoms clearly not coming from the adrenals. The adrenal lab was normal. But look at this, mitochondrial energy production having a big problem. So again, it's never carbohydrate metabolism by itself. It's always in a context. And we're always wondering, well, why is this a problem? Is it because of the parasitic infection that's causing inflammation, that's throwing the system off, causing some malabsorption, they're not absorbing very well? Is it related perhaps to energy production markers? So this is the tricky thing about functional medicine is, everything causes everything, and we're always trapped in these clinical situations where there's not like a single one product way that we're going to bail ourselves out, right? It's always multifactorial, et cetera, okay? So supplement-wise, with someone like this, and program design-wise, I want to show you some little cool things that we're doing now. Because, again, I'm always thinking about how you guys are going to apply this and how's it actually going to work in your practice. So let me show you this. This is a pretty nifty little thing that we created. I'm pretty excited about this. This is kind of a, it's like my idea of a toy. Yeah, if I just have one fast car, a couple of good bicycles, and some PowerPoints, I'm a pretty happy guy. And I told my son, I don't know, 6, 7 years ago, if I do end up having a tombstone, I'm pretty sure I want him to put on it, my dad, he had a PowerPoint for everything, because that's kind of like, I live by these. But check this out. So this particular patient that we just went over, adrenals were okay. Let's get that out of the picture. As a matter of fact, we could just delete that, can I? Yeah, gone. Okay, but remember, within the neuroendocrine system, remember 3 body systems, neuroendocrine, GI, detox, they had a major problem with energy production. That's a big issue, okay? They had the problem with carbohydrate metabolism, but the adrenals weren't affected, so we're going to focus probably more on food and some blood sugar support issues there. And then let's look at the rest of the lab so we can see what else was going on with that person. Can kind of build this program for you here. Okay, so this patient also had detox issues and some bacterial overgrowth problems in the intestine. So detox and bacterial issues. So again, as we're creating programs, there's some microbiome problem, bacterial overgrowth there, and detox. So when we get into program design for this patient, these would be the things that we would focus on for them. Energy production, food and blood sugar control, along with the supplements that are indicated based on pyruvate, the lipoic acid or whatever your favorite blood sugar support product is. Getting the microbiome corrected because there is an intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and then eventually detoxing. And then the only question in my mind is the order in which you're going to do all this. So I try to treat the patient, not the lab. So if their main complaint is that they're tired all the time, I'm going to probably treat their energy levels and get their diet figured out and get their blood sugar stable. And then maybe a month or 2 into it, we'll fix their microbiome and get the bacterial markers cleared up. And then maybe when that's starting to resolve, we'll start to work on detoxification issues. So again, this is program design, right? This is like, to me, a 6 to 12 month program for a patient. Starting with something that's going to make them feel better, energy production, carbohydrate metabolism, the diet, leading into a few months later, elimination of those harmful bacteria and rebalancing of the microbiome. When the gut's starting to calm down, looking at detoxification markers and flushing out all the toxins. So remember, neuroendocrine, GI, and detox, this sequence was taught to me many decades ago. It's been very effective. There's a couple of reasons why, and I'll show you right now, in case you're wondering. Oops, hang on a sec here. Oops, I keep hitting the wrong button, sorry. Hang on, let's go back over here. I'm going to show you with another example. Whoa, how did that happen? Here we go. Let's look at another patient example. I don't know, somehow I've been doing patients for so long, I can only think in patient speak. It's hard for me to do these things in the abstract. So here's another patient of mine. Now this person, carbohydrate metabolism-wise, is not doing very well. Lactate is elevated. Remember, that implies they're acidic. That implies their liver is stressed. Why is their liver stressed? Because they're doing all these mechanisms. They're using all these mechanisms. They're making all their glucose in the liver. Okay, they're using amino acids instead of carbohydrate. We can do that. When you see this elevated, it means the person's using amino acids, assuming they're not on like a strict paleo diet. The person's using amino acids to make their blood sugar. That's like the worst possible thing that could happen, right? Because where do we get those amino acids from? You get them from lean muscle mass, and you get them from the gut lining. And what's the gut lining full of? We all know this. Gut lining is full of glutamine. And guess what your body does? When the carb metabolism is not working, you're going to end up using lactate as a fuel supply, but you're also going to use amino acids like alanine and glutamine to make glucose. That is horrible because where are those amino acids coming from? Your body starts to strip down glutamine from the gut lining in order to make glucose. And what do we call that? That's called leaky gut. Okay, so carbohydrate metabolism problems cause leaky gut. Why? Because you're grabbing that glutamine from the gut lining to make glucose. It's a horrible thing, right? So this ends up being like a central component in so many different variables. If your carbohydrate metabolism doesn't get fixed and you're trying to treat leaky gut, you're just going to be hitting your head against the wall. And I'm telling you, I was in practice for 3 years. I met this crazy old man came into my clinic. And I looked at him, I thought, wow, is this guy homeless? What's going on with him? It's Dr. Bill Timmons. And you got to imagine, this is San Diego. This is early 90s. He always used to wear like these Tony Bahamas shirts or something like that. He was a really wonderful old man. And so he comes in my clinic. I'm like, who is this guy? He's kind of sketchy. He's like, oh, hey, I'm Dr. Timmons. Blah, blah, blah. And then he started talking to me, first conversation about carbohydrate metabolism. I'm like, there's no way that that's a big issue. How could this guy be right? Why didn't I learn that in school? And he put carb metabolism first. There's a reason why this is the first subject of the first test. Because if you don't figure this out, you're just going to be, giving people boatloads of glutamine and wondering why their gut is still leaky 3 years later. And of course it boils down to diet. Of course it boils down to adrenal function. There's a lot of other variables we're not talking about tonight. But I just want to re-emphasize, this is going to, if you don't correct this, it's going to screw up every other thing that you try to do. Okay, and the person's just going to continually be tired and sick. Okay, we want to make sure that we just address this. Now, supplement-wise, you can see here, they're suggesting CoQ10, lipoic acid, magnesium, manganese, chromium. Use one of these combination products. Get a good company, whatever company you like. My favorite ones, Thorne Research, Ortho. I love Designs for Health. I use them most of the time. Douglas Labs is great. Metagenics is great. Get one of these good quality professional companies. Use their blood sugar product. It should have lipoic acid, chromium, vanadium, etc. in it. Okay, and just go to town on fixing this. Now, let's look at the rest of this case. Got a couple minutes left, and I'll leave some questions, some time for questions at the end. Now, well, first of all, there's obviously a lot of other things going on with this patient. So just on this test alone. So you can see there's fatty acid problems. We'll talk about that later. There's energy production markers we mentioned. There's problems with kynurenate, which shows there's inflammation that's affecting the brain. Oh my gosh, their 8-OHDG is elevated. Oxidative stress galore, right? So there's other things going on. We're just looking at this one component. But let's look beyond this test, because what's going on in the gut? Well, nothing really. Gut test was normal. But let's look at the adrenals. Ouch. Okay, this is not a good adrenal test. The last one we looked at was normal. Kind of threw me. I wasn't expecting that, to be honest. This one, stage 3. Cortisol is really low. DHEA borderline low. What is one of cortisol's major roles? It's a glucocorticosteroid. So you can't fix cortisol in someone that has unstable carbohydrate metabolism. And in fact, fixing cortisol and carb metabolism are integrated so carefully so closely that they're really the same correction. And that's what I was mentioning Dr. Timmons for, because when he came into my clinic that time, I was like, well, how could blood sugar be that important? Like, really, no one talked about this to me before. I'm like, I've been in practice for 3 years and no one told me that this is like the most important thing. But when I started to do adrenal labs, I realized, oh, you can't fix cortisol. You can't fix thyroid. You're not going to get too far with sex hormones if the person's blood sugar is wonky. It's just not going to work. So a integral part of correcting the adrenal glands, in addition to all the adrenal protocols that we use, is what we're talking about tonight with carbohydrate metabolism. Now, if you have an adrenal case like this with very low cortisol and adrenal fatigue, adrenal burnout, and on top of that, GI is good, remember, no, on top of that, you have these carbohydrate metabolism markers. Now, what was really important, number one, becomes double important, okay? It becomes extra important. Now, it's a non-negotiable. The person has to do a blood sugar control diet. It's a non-negotiable. You have to have carbohydrate metabolism supplements in the protocol. If you had an adrenal case without these carb metabolism markers, then it's still very important, but you don't have that level of emphasis or absolute strictness that you might otherwise, okay? So I'm gonna, let me see here, wrap up in a second here. Let me tell you some details. Next class, March 14th, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We're going to talk about something which, in my mind, is even more important than carbohydrate metabolism, even though carbohydrate metabolism is the most important thing, which is mitochondrial energy production. This is something I've been really focusing on for a couple years, and I'm pretty excited to be talking about this as well. So we're going to get into mitochondrial energy, how all that works, why it's so important. There's a group of doctors that I'm just connecting with now that are looking at mitochondrial energy issues, in relation to cancer treatment. There's mitochondrial energy issues in relation to just about every kind of chronic disease you could imagine. We also have a training program that's going to be starting in March. If you're interested, come check it out. It's 9 modules. We've got tons of information. This is just like a general presentation, but when you're in class, you get more of these lectures than you could ever listen to, probably. And at the same time, you get to interact with the other doctors in the community. Right now, what's happened is that we expanded the class, so it's into 9 modules. We also have a business section now, finally, which talks about practice management ideas, how to hire staff, how to deal with your financials, your business planning issues, all that kind of stuff. We have this community with thousands of case studies and the coolest group of doctors you're ever going to meet. Medical doctors, chiropractors, osteopaths, acupuncturists, naturopaths. We have every stripe and variation of doctor that you can imagine in our community right now. It's a really exciting place to be. I enjoy it more than you all could imagine. Okay, so I'm going to take a break now. We're at the 1 hour mark. Go back to your families, enjoy. I'm going to answer a few questions that have come in, but feel free to take off now if you need to. And let me go through the questions, okay? So the first question from Natalie, can you use this to diagnose SIBO rather than a breath test? This is tricky. So this test looks for metabolites of bacteria that can overgrow in the digestive tract, but it's not a replacement for a SIBO test. So it's very confusing because the nomenclature overlaps. So we're looking at intestinal bacterial overgrowth, but this is not exactly what a SIBO test would be. Okay. Next question. How does it benefit the body to use a Cori cycle? It's just an emergency response system. That's the only thing. It's quick energy, super quick energy. Let's see. You said use lipoic acid for all patients. I was exaggerating. Sorry a little bit about that. But I do use alpha lipoic acid or lipoic acid supreme as much as I can get away with. 1 capsule twice a day. And it's probably like half the time. Sorry, I got a little irrationally exuberant there. It's not all the time. We spoke about high levels of acids. What's the significance if vanilmandelate, homovanillate, and hydroxyindolyl acetate are low? That's a good question. So we didn't. This is a neurotransmitter talk, but let me just show you real quick what he's asking about. Yeah, where is it? Let's see. Oh, I don't have it on this one. Hang on, let me show you real quick. There's neurotransmitter markers, and we have a whole talk on this coming up. Okay, if those markers are Elevated, you're burning through your neurotransmitters at an irrationally high rate. That's called worrying a lot or being stressed. If those markers are low, then you're in double trouble because now you don't even have the chemicals you need to worry. So what happens when that happens? People get tired, they get cranky, they just get exhausted emotionally. Okay, not a good thing. That was from Anthony. Let's see. Next question from James. Oh, supplementation with carnitine. I do that all the time based on the lab. You'll see these markers here at the beginning of the test: ethylmalonate, subarate, and adipate. Those are all related to carnitine. If carnitine levels are low, can give anywhere from 1,000 milligrams a couple times a day to more, depending on the patient and what their needs are. Let's see. Standard CoQ10 dose for the average patient. So I'm going to tell you like a deep emotional secret here. I had some CoQ10. We had boxes of it, and that stuff is not cheap. And I'm kind of cheap by nature. Like I don't like to throw things away necessarily. But I got so frustrated with using CoQ10 and never getting any kind of clinical result that I actually went into my office last year and I took all of our bottles of CoQ10 and I threw them in the garbage in an act of defiance. Okay, so that was my reaction to this whole micronutrient problem. Maybe a little excessive. Okay, maybe I was having a bad day, but that's what I did. So CoQ10, absolutely, I use it all the time, but it has to be contextualized. It has to be used with the other nutrients that are required to fix whatever the problem is that's behind it, right? So I do use CoQ10, usually 100 milligrams a couple times a day, but it's always in this context. Let's see, other questions. Let's see. Now, I don't get into individual supplements a lot, but I use, so if you want to use blood sugar control products, just find a company that you like and use, pick their combination products. So you don't have to worry about individual nutrients so much. And let's see, I think we're running out of time here. Oh, one last thing. We have this other thing here. I don't know why it didn't show up on my PowerPoint, but we have Kalish Method 101. Is it in here? Did I just miss it? Oh, yeah, I didn't go far enough. Sorry, my bad. So we have Kalish Method 101. It's a $397. It's an introduction to all the work that we're doing here. If you're not ready to sign up for the full class, check this out. It's been really popular. I think we did a good job putting this together. Okay, you got a bunch of lectures. I do one call live that you can ask questions for, all kinds of downloadable resources. There's a ton of information in it, really effective. And then for those of you that want to sign up for Kalish Method 101 by March 15th, you get a credit towards your mentorship tuition if you sign up for the full program. Check it out. See what you want to do. If you just want an easy entry point, $300-400, you can do that class and get started and see what we're all about over at the Kalish Institute. Okay. And let's see. Oh, for those of you that are existing students or old students like Patty, absolutely, you can take the organic acids materials as a separate standalone class. Okay, we're still calling that the advanced class for the older students. And you who are older students, have been around for a while, you're welcome to sign up for the advanced class. All right, take care, everyone. I hope this was helpful, and we'll talk soon. Sign up for something. We want you to come, and we want you to learn, and we want to train you. So jump on board. Talk to you soon. Take care.